All right, welcome back, everyone. So, what did y'all think of the debates? Last debate before the elections come up pretty soon now. Just so y'all know, I have the camera above my laptop, and I have the chat below. So, again, if you see me looking down, it's because I'm reading the chats. Just move my windows around a little bit here. All right. Well, first up, I think you'll all be happy to know. I think last time I mentioned that I don't vote as a journalist. I think it's my understanding has been it was a way to not to stay non-biased as much as I possibly could, at least on the personal interest level. Yeah, one second, I'll keep going on it. You'll be happy to know I've changed my mind on this, mainly because a lot of you shared some pretty good insights into this with me. Now, my reason for not voting, at least last elections, was because it was my understanding that I think journalists should stay out of processes which could make them take a stance when it comes to political bias. Even though, just being a journalist, of course, watching policy every day and seeing what's true and what's not, and of course, investigating claims and finding out that some claims are actually false, like the whole Trump-Russia scandal, for example. Of course, I can see which politicians are telling the truth and which ones are lying. And anyways, I've reassessed this, and my understanding now is actually, as a journalist, I think I'm a journalist as my job, of course, but in my personal life, I think it's fine and a responsibility to vote. And so I've changed my mind on this. You'll be happy to know. Now that said, I don't want to go too deep into it. Yeah, how y'all doing? Got my kombucha again tonight as usual. And I got a few questions on the right here I can go over as well. Let's see here. Now, let's do a quick recap. And folks, if you have questions, leave them in the chat, and I'll try to get to them. Let's see here. So what do we go over tonight? I want to start with the CCP virus, this new coronavirus. Hey, thank you, Last Cynic Actual. I am broke AF, but we need more folks like you. I appreciate it. Thank you. And then Rudy Naris, thank you as well. Let's start off with the CCP virus. Now, Biden's stance, he was blaming Trump, saying there was no mask mandate. They've been repeating, him and Kamala Harris have been repeating 200,000 people dead. Trump has been repeating, the number would have been a lot higher had we kept the borders open with China. And when he kept the borders open when he closed the border with China, when he closed travel to China, a lot of Democrats called him xenophobic. A lot of them called him racist. And really, that was estimated to have saved possibly, I think, 2 million lives by some estimates. And I think Trump's exact words were, Pelosi was dancing on the streets of Chinatown, which was true, if you remember that. After Trump closed the border, I'll get to the question. After Trump closed the border, closed travel with China, Nancy Pelosi and many Democrats were in Chinatown fighting against racism, and they were trying to make this big sign of that. I think one of the big things, well, let me get to a couple more points on this. Chris Scars, thank you. I'll get to that in a minute. When it comes to policy on this, Biden said, shut down the virus, not the country. What's the plan then? He contradicted himself. I think Biden really didn't lay out what his plan was. In the last debate, he actually went a bit more into it, and Trump pointed out that really and of course Pence as well during his debates with Kamala Harris, pointed out that the Democrat plan under Biden in terms of fighting the virus isn't really different from what Trump's doing already, which is push for a vaccine, which is try to negotiate between Republicans and Democrats to get a spending bill passed. One of the reasons they didn't pass that so far is because they can't agree on it, mainly because Democrats are being accused of stuffing in socialist policy to, bail out New York. When I being in New York, I can tell you they're making a lot of very poor decisions. De Blasio is making very poor decisions when it comes to, let's say, where the money is going and where it's not going, and in terms of the lockdowns. His stance is, why are you allowing things to stay open? Or sorry, why are you not negotiating with Nancy Pelosi? Trump shot back and said, well, look, why are you not negotiating with Nancy Pelosi? You're in government for 47 years. You're still on the Democrat side. Why are you not negotiating with them to get it passed? Basically, Biden was blaming Trump for the virus outbreak for two reasons. One was, why are you not, getting this bill passed, the stimulus bill passed, which Trump said is because the Democrats won't concede. And he's also saying, why are you not basically overriding local policy? And in other words, why is he not, for example, sorry. Why is he not, for example, overriding local policy in different states to force, mask mandates? Biden has said previously he'd make a national mask mandate. Really, if you look at the situation, if they're talking about social distancing, if they're talking about mask mandates, if they're talking about opening up restaurants and making sure that Biden mentioned having barriers between people and really having pretty Orwellian type systems to make sure people don't come in contact with each other. Which politicians was it again who was encouraging people to go out and hold mass protests, gathered shoulder to shoulder, marching on the streets of the major cities in the U.S.? I don't understand why this wasn't brought up. Actually, which politicians were encouraging people to violate all the standards on the lockdown during the height of it, to gather en masse, to shout at the top of their lungs, and to violate social distancing rules. And in New York, if you participated in these mass protests, it wasn't even included as one of the questions in terms of contact tracing. If we're talking about super spreader events, and if they actually believe that social distancing and these types of things protect you from a super spreader event, that was the biggest super spreader event in the United States. And Trump condemned that. Democrats did not condemn it. I don't know why that wasn't brought up more clearly. Now, Trump's policy with the virus has been basically, I think he believed Fauci during the beginning. He believed the WHO and even China in the beginning, as did every country in the world. Trump arguably believed them a bit less, given that he locked down the border with travel and he stopped travel. He stopped, travel from China to the U.S. He was criticized for that. He was condemned for doing that. And so even though, of course, you could say he had these different policies allowing that type of travel, allowing maybe things to stay more open, really, he took a stronger stance than anyone. A lot of the announcements, a lot of the things people were pushing for at that time, Fauci, WHO, Democrats, Trump went against and really took a stronger stance on them, and very likely stopped the spread quite a bit in that regard. A few people, stay easy, my friends. Thank you. Appreciate it. Appreciate the donation. Thank you. I saw actually Canada acknowledged China's genocide today. Quick diversion, quick change of pace on this. The Canadian government actually today designated the CCP's persecution of Muslim Uyghurs a genocide. One of the subcommittees of their parliament. That was a big deal. I'll be going into that tomorrow, actually. White Raven, thank you as well. Appreciate the donation. Really, all of you, thank you. One sec. Now, as well on this, one thing I've been seeing, if you remember going back before this virus outbreak, what was happening in this country? Record jobs, record economic growth. Remember when Trump said he was going to have 3.5 economic growth? Remember that? And Obama said, what magic wand do you have? And then Trump surpassed that economic growth number. Really, record economic growth, record jobs, including for Blacks, Latinos, different groups in the U.S. Really, things were looking good. It actually looked like he was going to sign a trade deal with China, and I think he changed his position on China following the virus outbreak. He took a much harder stance on them afterwards. But really, things were pretty good. It was the virus outbreaks that stopped that, and the Trump administration is now taking the blame for that when it comes to these new narratives on the elections. Trump is being blamed. Oh, where's the economic growth? Where are the jobs? Trump's pointing out economic growth is stalled because mainly Democrat cities are holding lockdowns. It's mostly Democrat areas having lockdowns, shutting down businesses. Although, of course, in the beginning stage, there was what was it, 3 weeks to stop the spread? Something like that. You had the lockdowns. You had what was it? Lockdowns, businesses out. You had people locked in their homes. Really, it was that harmed the economy, that harmed the jobs. Trump's being blamed for that now. And on top of that as well, a lot of the deaths were in major cities. New York, for example, I think 40 million dead, and a lot of them from poor policy when it came to the senior homes. A lot of that could be bad on poor policy. Sorry, a few of you in here. All right. Anyways, let's move on from the CCP virus argument onto some of the next ones. Well, actually, one more point on that. It seems like the big thing that Biden is pushing for, and he's not really talking about it, is he's pushing for, well, he's not saying it directly. He's pushing for Trump to basically override local government law. And this is one of the big differences you're going to find between Trump policy and Biden policy. Trump wants to maintain the traditional structure of the U.S. government in terms of what is the domain of what is the domain of power for the federal government versus the domain of power for state governments, local governments. Trump is not doing these things from a federal level, not all of them at least. He's pushing, of course, for a vaccine. He has a military mobilization plan for distributing the vaccine, which he's talked about. And but he's not overriding state policy or local policy. Biden's plan is saying, basically, the things Trump's being accused on is that he's not overriding state and local policy when it comes to rolling out mandatory mask mandates, when it comes to lockdowns, when it comes to things like this. Let's move on to some of the next points. Sorry. My throat's a bit dry today. You have to forgive me. Now, when it comes to state deals, actually the Biden laptop scandal was brought up today. And it was interesting that, sorry, I'm reading some of your comments. Josh, you should have this Q&A in a pajamas and tip cap. Yeah, it would be more comfortable. I'd consider it. Yeah. All right, anyways. On the foreign deals, actually the Biden laptop scandal was brought up today. And it was interesting hearing about that because actually Joe Biden himself kind of brought it up, which was a surprise. And he's saying it's a Russian disinformation campaign. Now, on that note, a lot of the mainstream media, I saw Politico had a story on it. They're saying that the Biden laptop scandal is a Russian disinformation campaign. They're basing this on statements from former intelligence agency individuals who notably say that they have no actual proof that it's a Russian disinformation campaign. And this is a common disinformation tactic where you have a lot of people making general statements or making claims based on opinion, and the collection of those claims is used to form a single narrative that is presented as an absolute truth. There is no evidence. There is no evidence that it was a Russian disinformation campaign. The narrative of that is just a rumor. It's people's personal belief. Meanwhile, at the same time, the FBI and I think Department of Homeland Security, the U.S. government right now is determined, stated publicly, it's not a disinformation campaign. There's no evidence of that. That is not what's going on. Biden frequently said that. Trump shot back at him a few times for that, saying, oh, it's Russia, Russia, Russia again. What's this? And Trump accused him several times of the deals that Biden, at least Hunter Biden, made and Joe Biden may have benefited from. He accused him of such through Russia, through China, for example. Now, Biden again denied that and accused Trump of having done business with China and said, what about this bank account you had in China and so on. Trump clarified the bank account that he had opened in China was when he was a private businessman. That was in 2014, and it was when he was looking into making deals in China, which he decided not to do, and then never used that bank account. There was no further back and forth on that. Oh, Dominic Bristow, I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your coverage and added voice on U.S. relations. I really appreciate it. Actually, all of you, I keep missing some of the super chats. I really appreciate the donations. Thank you. Yeah, what in Joe's defense regarding the Hunter laptop? Again, they're saying it's Russian disinformation, based ironically on a broad statement which has no evidence. There's no evidence it's Russian disinformation. When it came to migration, Biden's big thing was what happened to these 500 kids separated from their parents, and they still are not able to find their parents. Now, I'm surprised Trump actually didn't hit back harder on that, because that's really taking things out of context. Now, what is not brought up? A lot of times, yes, kids are brought into the U.S., trafficked with their families. Sometimes they're brought over by snakeheads or coyotes, the different human traffickers. They hire them, they bring them over, and what do you have happen? A lot of times, these kids themselves are being trafficked. One of the big things the Trump administration started doing was DNA testing people through mouth swabs to determine whether these kids are actually the children of the people who are with them, and they find a lot of times they are not. Turns out these kids being brought over are oftentimes being trafficked. The kids themselves are basically slaves being used by the coyotes. They bring them here. Now the Trump administration is finding a lot of these kids, are the people they're with are not their parents, and they're separating them. The 500 they're referring to seem to be with that. Now, also on this, I'm just reading some of your chats here. Look up Master Tonic and Firesider for cold. Appreciate it. Thank you. Now, when it comes to the kids in cages narrative, because that was another one that was brought up, Trump pointed back at this, saying, well, 2014, that's when that photo is from. Who was in power in 2014? That was the Obama administration. The whole kids in cages narrative was an Obama policy, Biden being vice president during that time. The photographs of kids in cages now used as a talking point, that was Obama policy. And so again, false narratives, so on. One sec. White Raven, are many of these, appreciate the donation, are many of these among those ICE have rescued? Actually, it's interesting. I want to do something. I'm going to do some more on. Actually, I have some interesting coverage lined up. I can maybe give you all a hint on it, or a preview on it. Now, one of the big things the Trump administration has done, and at least they've been making a lot of public statements on it, is fighting against human trafficking. I'm going to be in California after the elections. I'm going to do some on the ground reporting there. One of them I'm going to do is going to these smuggling tunnels along the U.S.-Mexico border, and hopefully get some good content on human trafficking and on drug trafficking. And so stay tuned for that. That should be after the elections, early November. All right, moving on with this. One sec. A mind with heart. Why doesn't anyone ask about the 3.7 million the U.S. dollars that Obama, Biden, and Fauci used to move virus research to Wuhan, China in 2014? That was a big one as well. Actually, Trump canceled a lot of those things. All right, moving on to race issues. Now, the race narrative from Biden, when he talked about it, was more like a personal anecdote of what he'd tell people. This is the question asked by the moderator. How would you talk to people who are of are of minority groups in the U.S.? What would you tell them in terms of racism in America and so on? Biden really gave kind of a emotional argument saying, there's racism in America and this and that. Trump shot back and said, well, what about the 1994 crime bill that Biden and other Democrats passed? The whole hard on crime bill. Now, Trump said that Biden had called them at the time super predators. I believe actually that was Hillary Clinton who said super predators. Trump says Trump stood by that. I need to verify that. I know Hillary Clinton called them super predators, and that was actually recorded. Trump said Biden called them that, but regardless, Biden was one of the people on that 1994 crime bill. Also, he pointed out, look, he's been in office for 47 years. He's been in government for 47 years. What has he done other than the 1994 crime bill to fight crime? Biden pointed out that during the Obama administration, when he was vice president, they had let out thousands of people, commuted sentences from prisons. Now, yes, the Obama administration did let a lot of people out of prison. A lot of those people had kind of funky ties. For example, like Marxist terrorist groups and so on. a lot of these things, you can look at the whole picture of things, but sometimes the context of individual cases says a very different story. Another big thing actually that should be noted. Yeah, appreciate you all folks. Another thing that should be noted as well. One thing that I'm surprised Trump didn't bring up was Biden's plan for policing. Now, Trump and Biden, when it comes to law enforcement, if you all watched the whole policy video I did, I talked about some of this. The Trump administration's plan for policing is actually basically increase budgets for police, make sure they have more training, get more resources out to make sure that they can do a better job at it. When it comes to Biden's plan, what he's talking about, oh, wow, and Kim Hanafe, appreciate it. When it comes to Biden's plan, what he's talking about is really bringing in a lot more race training programs, cutting budgets for police. He's not calling it defunding, but it's kind of what it is. But the biggest thing he's talking about doing, which no one's really talking about, is eliminating qualified immunity for police. And when you look at the places where that's been passed in the United States, the elimination of qualified immunity, you have police quitting in droves. This is a way of getting rid of police in the country. If you want to incentivize police to not do their jobs and to quit, a lot of times, eliminating qualified immunity is the way to do it. Nobody's talking about this. Now, what's qualified immunity? It's basically for police officers, if a person feels you mishandled an arrest or so on, and they want to go after you, they sue you, it goes to the department. The officer, him or herself, is protected from that to a large extent. And what happens is, basically the officer doesn't have to deal with these constant rolling lawsuits because there are groups, activist groups, that do things like that. If they lose qualified immunity, it means the officers themselves can get sued, meaning that any arrest, any day of the week, and they make many arrests, a lot of times, many times a week, any one of those people and their family members could sue the police, which means the police officers themselves, making like $50,000 a year, would have to pay out of pocket for very expensive lawyer fees and so on to deal with that. And a lot of them are looking at their income and looking at the amount of arrests they do and the stuff they deal with. And they're saying, even if I'm innocent and I have to fight, ongoing legal battles using my own money, I'm never going to be able to, I'm not going to be able to survive. And sorry. And so you have a lot of police retiring or quitting because of that, is what's happening right now. I appreciate you all, folks. No, I'm okay. I'm all right. Don't worry. I appreciate it, though. Thank you. All right. That said, let's go into some of the questions. Let me see what we have here first. Oh, Denise Coop, thanks for being here. Was Trump given a better answer when the moderator asked about Biden's possible corruption? He should have said the intelligence community has verified the emails are real and not from Russia. Yeah, thank you as well. Actually, I'm surprised Trump didn't point that out, actually, because he was, Biden said it's a Russian disinformation campaign, and it's been said as such by different intelligence officers. Trump didn't respond to that and say, actually, intelligence agencies are saying it is not a Russian disinformation campaign. And so it was kind of bizarre that he didn't say that, I think. All right, so some of the questions for today. Chris Scars, I appreciate the donation. Thank you. Do you think foreign policy was a no-go due to Trump having a good record on the issue? Yeah, they actually didn't go too deep into it. One of the big issues they went into was of course, China. And they also went into, of course, North Korea. Now, Biden actually criticized Trump for trying to engage with Kim Jong-un in North Korea. And, compared him to Hitler and said, before World War II, we were engaging with Hitler. Basically on the same ground as that, how dare you try to engage? How dare you try to engage with Kim Jong-un diplomatically? Trump pointed out, look, we haven't had nuclear threats from him since I started doing that. You might remember during the Obama administration, what was it? Every few months there was there was a new nuclear threat from North Korea. How many of you remember the nuclear threats from North Korea and the panic it caused every single time he did so? And, in China, really, they were using North Korea for that a lot of times because China was like the negotiator. They could step in, the U.S. would rely on China, and for the international image, it looked good on China. They were they were the mediator between North Korea and the West, and then the U.S. oftentimes gave them packages, finance packages, saying, "Oh, here's some money to take care of your people. Essentially, please don't bomb us or threaten us again." It was a way for North Korea to make money off the international community. They would do this every few months. Y'all notice we haven't had them threaten nuclear war in a while now, right? And remember what happened early on too. Remember that when Trump first came into office, North Korea was threatening nuclear war. Trump said that we would respond with that to a nuclear attack with great fury and so on. They'd never rise from the ashes. That kind of talk. And I mean, really, it worked. He was criticized. People were saying, this isn't how you do diplomacy. This isn't how you do it. It worked. I mean, honestly. And now, of course, Biden's criticizing him for engaging with Kim Jong-un at all, which is kind of a weird a weird stance, but I assume it's politics. They have to make arguments like that. SSWALLAM, appreciate the donation. Thank you. And also, Last Cynic Actual, good to see you back. When it comes to other foreign policy issues, he really didn't get into ISIS either. How many of you remember ISIS and the caliphate that was never going to go away? Obama was saying it's never going to go away. This is something we're going to be dealing with, for the foreseeable future. No way to resolve it. Nothing we can do about it. Just deal with it. Where's ISIS now? I haven't seen them in a while. Have you? I'm surprised you didn't bring it up, actually. And also, Russia was brought up as well. Really, the controversy around Russia was two things. One was the Trump-Russia investigations, which turned out to be pretty much a big scam. And two was Russia's invasion of Ukraine after the Obama administration made the whole, start over plan. You might remember they had this big red button in the New START plan and so on. Then Russia goes and invades Ukraine and throws the whole thing under the bus. Those are the two things Russia did. Well, one of them they did, one of them they didn't do. And of course, they're being accused of trying to rig the election still, which they do, actually. A lot of countries do stuff like that as well. Trump has not really engaged with Putin much. Biden has. But you might remember when Trump has tried to engage with Putin, the media typically try to frame it as Trump trying to collude with Putin. They make a big scandal out of it. They made it very hard for him to do so, actually. And Trump has blamed the media and the Democrat base because the Democratic Party and the Clinton campaign financed, you might remember, the whole Steele dossier, which was a different disinformation document that was used to frame the initial narrative and led to the investigations to some degree into the whole Trump-Russia scandal. That whole thing has prevented engagement with Russia, essentially. Emma Valdez, appreciate it. Thank you. All right, let's keep moving on. And then Trump pointed out as well that with the Biden scandal, Hunter Biden scandals, that actually Biden himself, Joe Biden, seemed to, at least through his son, have made deals with Russia. Pointed out millions of dollars in deals with Russia. Monica Lynn, how much money did the Russia hoax cost Americans? Trump's just said $40 to $48 million. Russian probe cost 20. I think the 40 to 48 millions was the amount they paid for the Steele dossier and for the different stages of framing the narrative, if I remember right. Go on, the Mueller probe cost $25 million so far, report says. It's pulled in $48 million from tax cheats. Yeah, it's not clear what that cost America. I think you could say tens of millions, but I think the real cost to America was social disharmony, mass stress, and bad perceptions of the U.S. president when he was trying to engage with other countries for pretty much his entire first term. I would say that the impact of it can't be measured because that to a large extent, crippled Trump's entire first term. He was dealing with constant battles over it turned out to be disinformation. Emma Valdez, I appreciate it. Thank you. And I think that if Trump gets reelected, we're going to see this really go forward, this whole Crossfire hurricane scandal. We'll see how it unfolds, but if the FBI can be fixed and these different federal agencies can be fixed, people could go to jail for this. We'll have to see. Ram Selient, appreciate the donation. Yeah, Putin has been, quote, to say he wants Biden to win. Yeah. All right. Stay easy, my friend said. Canada acknowledged China's genocide today. I mentioned that actually. Now, a mind with heart says, question, Biden kept saying 200,000 more are going to die. What is he talking about? Now, Biden's talking about the virus. It's kind of weird he's suggesting 200,000 more people are going to die. He's suggesting 200,000 more Americans are going to die from the virus. I don't know what he's basing that on. Now, Trump has pointed out that if you look at countries that are making virus numbers, the reason why the U.S. has such high estimates is because we're doing more testing than most countries. A lot of countries aren't doing testing at all. A lot of countries don't seem to be really doing testing at all. What was also not brought up is the information used to determine what is a coronavirus death, because the way a lot of hospitals were measuring it, if you had any other kind of health problem and you got the virus and you died from that, it was called a COVID death, meaning that the entire estimate in terms of how the deaths were even determined was false. In fact, they came out with some information on that and changed the numbers. They had to readjust the numbers because the numbers were not correct. People died from other causes and they called it coronavirus deaths. Let's move on. This is from Lainal LE. I appreciate the donation. Thank you. What is your opinion about protests in Thailand? Wish you go well soon. Appreciate it. To be honest, I haven't followed much on that. I will look into the protests in Thailand, though. Thank you. Denise, Jamesy Dio. Appreciate the donation. What is Joe's defense regarding the Hunter laptop? How are the Dems this incident? He's saying it's a Russian disinformation campaign. He's saying Hunter Biden didn't make any of these deals. He's denying he made any money off it. He's saying the whole thing is false, which is bizarre because even aside from the laptop and even aside from the leaked emails, there's public information on a lot of these things. In fact, the documentary Riding the Dragon is based mostly on open source information. You can go verify a lot of it. And so the fact that he's saying it's all a Russia disinformation hoax is really bizarre. Now, in terms of the validity of the laptop, hard to verify. It does, the FBI did say they have it in their possession. It does seem there's some truth to it. We'll have to see what the actual contents are because it goes forward. White Raven, thank you for the donation. What's the chance of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission if Biden was to win? Think of shutting down investigations on Dems. I think at the very least you'd see that. I think at the very least you'd shut down the investigations of the Democrats. Very likely as well. I mean, looking back at the whole Trump-Russia scandal, the real irony was they could have probably kept that investigation going indefinitely. They probably could have maintained that whole narrative indefinitely. You know what actually threw a wrench into that whole narrative was when, funny enough, when BuzzFeed came out and publicly released the entire Steele dossier. That destroyed their entire narrative. That was when things started turning around. You might remember everyone was saying, "Oh, I've seen different politicians, different journalists, different experts were coming out. I've seen classified information saying that Trump colluded with Russia, and there's some very shocking things on it. We need to launch an investigation." That was the narrative. They could have ran on that narrative to now, and very likely they could have made impeachment, prosecutions, anything based on that narrative. That entire possibility was thrown out because what happened? BuzzFeed came out and publicly published the entire dossier. And I don't know what they were thinking. If maybe they thought that it was a good idea to do so. Maybe they thought it would hurt Trump. But really, it showed that the dossier itself was total nonsense. It was disinformation. And then questions started coming out on how was it financed? It came out, well, it was financed by the DNC and the Clinton campaign. And, history goes from there. Firewalker, appreciate the donation. If Biden gets arrested, would Kamala get his votes and nomination? I mean, it's interesting. Based on what we're seeing with this Hunter Biden laptop, this whole scandal, if they could actually make a prosecution on this, Joe Biden himself could possibly face charges for it. Could they do something on that before November 3rd in the elections. I think that's pushing it, to be honest. A case like that, an investigation like that, I mean, independent investigation is one thing. FBI investigation is another thing. The government typically doesn't move that fast. Let's put it that way. I don't think they would do it fast enough. But really, if this information's true, it's pretty serious, to be honest. We'll have to see what happens after the elections with it. Telekinetic. Will Trump hold the WHO accountable for not investigating Wuhan lab and virus origin adequately? It's hard to hold the WHO accountable at this point. The Trump administration, they already pulled funding out of the WHO and ended our relations with the WHO, the World Health Organization. You might remember China was saying, basically, we will not allow anyone into the country to investigate an origin of the virus. We will not allow anybody into the country to investigate the origin. Then they said, we'll allow the WHO in. The U.S. at the time determined WHO was not independent of the Chinese Communist Party. They could not demonstrate independence. And so what happened? Well, WHO did go into China. They did an investigation. They didn't even go to the laboratories. They didn't even look into a possible lab origin, which is what a lot of people are concerned about. And, the whole thing just kind of ended in a puff of air. Nobody's heard anything about it. I actually went through a wrench into that whole narrative. Funny enough, was when this virologist, this woman, left China for the United States, defected, and came out and said it was made in a laboratory and I can prove it. And she's been doing a lot with Bannon, with Steve Bannon, those guys. And so really that threw a wrench into that whole narrative that could have come out of that. And again, we'll have to see what comes out if there ever is a real investigation into it. But China basically controls the possibility of an investigation at this point. It's just the reality of it. All right. Slavic savior. Wasn't pedophilia legal in the USSR? Why do the liberals think they will be allowed their crimes under socialist government? Do you think if China falls, DPRK will follow? I'm not sure if pedophilia was illegal in the USSR. Now, a funny thing, a lot of people point to, socialism and, sexual liberation and, Me Too movement stuff. Look, the sexual liberation movement in the Soviet Union and in China was horrifying. Of course, it was eliminating private property, and women were determined under that. You should share your body with other men. CCP officials could have harems of girls who are essentially raped by Communist Party officials. This is one of the crimes against humanity that's very rarely talked about. You had the same thing going on in the Soviet Union, where they had like commune-type relationships, and it was devastating to the country. The Soviets actually had to move away from that. Now, actually, on that note of pedophilia, I did a story, a few years back now, about Soviet pedophile rings, which it was pretty shocking stuff, to be honest. It didn't really make waves like I thought it would. But basically, it points to research that was being done in the Soviet Union at the Komsomol camps, which were like the young communist league groups. And basically, they were doing experiments on pedophilia to see if they could manufacture, using these things, sexual perversions within people and how to grow those things. And allegedly during that time, they began using that as a model for honey traps in other countries. I pointed out that Ghislaine Maxwell's father actually was, he was investigated by the FBI during the Cold War, and he was suspected of being a Soviet spy. Now, different news outlets said the FBI determined he was not. If you read the FBI documents, because they're publicly available, they never determined he was not. Actually, the FBI documents gave pretty serious evidence that he was. They just never were able to prove it. And so, we'll have to see what comes out with this. Remember that when Epstein was arrested, the first time, not the recent time when he, killed himself, right? The first time he was arrested, one of the things that came out in that arrest was that he actually was inviting very powerful people to his island. They had underage girls there. They had video recording equipment in the rooms, and he had logs of every guest. Whatever happened with that? Where are these logs? Where are these videos? Who was involved with that? And why was the world never told about this? Epstein that first time got a slap on the wrist, and he got off for being with a 16-year-old girl, and was, from what I understand, research I've done, able to even leave prison during the day because he had such a light sentence. It was a slap on the wrist sentence that meant nothing. Moving on. From Douglas, appreciate the donation as well. Thank you. While Hillary was on the board at Walmart and the company began moving production to China, coincidence? I'm actually not familiar with that. I apologize. This is from Hesky, 10600. Appreciate the donation. What is your opinion about the ongoing protests in Midland, Texas against Bob Fu of China Aid, who have alleged ties with CCP? How about start a BitChute channel as backup for all your YouTube videos? With Bob Fu, I mean, it's complicated. You have that Chinese billionaire accusing him of being a spy. Sometimes you have people accusing people back and forth of being Chinese spies. To be honest, I don't know. It seems like a personal conflict to me. I'm not sure the whole situation. I've actually interviewed Bob Fu on Crossroads in the past. Actually, he seemed like a decent guy. I mean, who knows? Bob Fu is one of the big religious freedom activists for China. Who knows? In terms of BitChute, actually, that's not a bad idea. I've thought about starting a BitChute channel just in case they try to delete this one. We're kind of just expecting sometimes censorship these days because it's becoming so common. It's just a normal thing to deal with. Deborah Ann, appreciate the donation. So many questions on debate and factions involved. Sorry, late. Yet we'll reference the obvious. Thank you, Joshua and Epoch Team. Appreciate it. Thank you. So this is from Christopher Chua. Can any lies the presidential candidates said in the debate be legally used against them? Not that I know of. It's not like government testimony, like where you lie under testimony or lie under oath. They don't go into these things making oaths, and so they can lie. It's just like a public statement from a politician. Politicians are not always known to be that honest. Let's put it that way. One sec. I got my kombucha again, as I mentioned. All right. Matthew Keller. Why do you think we are only hearing about the laptop now, considering the FBI has had it for a while? That's a big question to ask. And it's something that has been pointed out by the Trump administration and by Donald Trump Jr. as well, that if the FBI had this laptop this whole time, which may show quid pro quo on behalf of Joe Biden, when it comes to, for example, his video where he talks about how he forced Ukraine to end an investigation into Hunter Biden, saying, end it, or, we're going to punish you for it, essentially. Why was that not brought up? Meanwhile, Trump was impeached by the Democrats for being accused of quid pro quo, actually over that, telling the Ukrainians to investigate Hunter Biden. And, it's one of these things sometimes where you have politicians sometimes accuse other people of doing what they themselves did. It's a very common tactic because it's very hard to push back against. It's hard to push back against because you have to fight back on the same ground, that same narrative, that same playing field. It's not a new playing field, so it's difficult in that regard. Deborah Ann, appreciate the donation. Thank you. But again, if it does turn out the FBI had this evidence, had reviewed this evidence, and had not made it public when Trump was being impeached, and when, again, the stability of the nation was at stake because of false narratives, it could be a big deal, actually. I mean, at the same time, I think we're in a state in this country where not just the president has been dragged through these disinformation campaigns, like the Trump-Russia scandal, but really the American people as well have been dragged through it. Think of all the chaos in this country over the past 4 or 5 years with all these narratives. Think of the scandals, the rolling scandals we've seen, which get proven false one after the next, and then people just seem to forget about them. Think about the false narratives that are framed around people who try to get in positions like Brett Kavanaugh. It's terrible what's happened in this country, and people are not being held accountable for it. And I don't know if they can be held accountable for it. This is one of the issues, whether it's Trump or Biden, is going to have to deal with in, I think, the next presidential cycle, which is that Americans, to a large extent, have lost faith, not so much in police, but in the institutions of law in this country. How many of you believe the FBI is free of corruption? How many of you believe that the local DAs and prosecutors will fairly prosecute cases outside of political viewpoints? Right and left, I would say that this faith in the main institutions of law have been destabilized. And I think Trump needs to address that, and Biden, if he becomes president, would need to address that as well. One of the few things that I think could restore trust would be honest prosecution of individuals involved in what is very obvious crime that has taken place and has been allowed to take place. Ram Sellian, thank you for the donation. Because the laptop is part of a money laundering investigation, the FBI does not share info on an active case. That's interesting. That's actually very possible. Actually, that's true. As a matter of fact, you might remember I forget the guy's name. Peter Schweizer has written books, including, for example, Clinton Cash. He wrote another book talking about Biden just before all this happened. And actually through that and around that time, I think last year, one of Hunter Biden's business associates was in fact arrested. That a business associate now is actually coming out and allegedly giving information to police and has allegedly been moved to protection of some kind. It's not clear exactly what category of protection that is. But yeah, there are ongoing investigations into this. And so actually, that's a good point. It's possible now that the reason these things are not coming out right now is because it's an ongoing investigation. And based on that too, maybe we will see something come out on this before the elections. But again, it would be hard. I think if Trump believes he's going to win the elections, he would not do that. I think if Trump believes he has this election under his belt, he's not going to try to prosecute Biden before the elections. I don't think he would do that, mainly because it would look like a coup, one, and then very likely it would affect voters and change the outcome, to an extent. It would be a black swan for Trump. I don't know if he'd take that risk if he believes he has it under his belt. One sec. All right. The one and only Pinky. Why is nobody talking about Nancy Pelosi's son, who is in cahoots with Hunter Biden? Wow. That's going to be another big thing coming out, actually. It does seem to be this is becoming a common trend, which is that family members of politicians seem to be involved in scandals. And these scandals seem to be tied sometimes to the to the positions of influence of these different politicians. Whether it be, for example, the Uranium One scandal and the whole, Clinton Cash book scandal, laying out all these things. And remember that at the time of when Clinton Cash was written, for example, it was not a right-left thing. It was not Republican-Democrat thing. Even, for example, New York Times, even New York Times had a big article laying out the case on it. And even New York Times talked about this and, made the case against Hillary Clinton. At the time, it was not really seen as a right-left conservative liberal type thing. But again, it was following the same basic model, which is that politician, is in charge of some part of the government that can pass laws or, make deals or so on. And one of their family members is touring around the world, making a lot of money, doing speaking engagements, making deals and so on, doing things that appear to align very closely with the actions of the politician. As they get money, things happen on the political side. This seems to be a very concerning pattern of the way things have been done in the United States. And I mean, we'll have to see what comes out from this. KFP Lumbine, appreciate the donation. Blessings, Joshua. Love your investigative reporting. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. All right, folks, I've been going on now about an hour. Let's see here. I'll do one more question, then we'll call it a night. This is Christian for Christ. What about sweeping civil servant law taking effect next year? It aligns with the Chinese government more than American government. Your take? So I did this big analysis piece you might have seen, looking into Trump's policies and Biden's policies. One thing that really stood out to me, and more so than I even thought previously, before I went through Trump's policies top to bottom. I went through Biden's policies top to bottom. It didn't occur to me how socialist, and not to use this common phrase here, how socialist Biden's policies are. He's not calling it this, but really his healthcare plan is pure socialism. It is a socialist healthcare plan. If you look at what he's actually talking about, a state-run healthcare plan, he's saying it'll allow still competition, it'll allow for these types of things, but he has policies in place to go after private companies offering insurance plans. And also allowing the government more power over medicine. If the government controls its own healthcare plan, if the independent companies are facing more pressure, and you have the government able to work directly on the price of medicine and so on, you're gonna wind up pretty quick with a socialist medical system where it's one system controls it all. When it comes to, for example, his economic plan, it really is modeled after the Green New Deal. Huge infrastructure plans, all focused around the Green New Deal framework. They even call it this on their website, Green New Deal framework. And really, that's what it is. When it comes to police, it's putting policies in place that would either make a lot of police quit or not do their jobs, and also reducing what would constitute a crime, for example, drug charges and so on. I can tell you that in New York, where they decriminalized a lot of drug use, crime here is rampant. It feels like there's no rule of law anymore. That this will become America if that happens. Richard Buchanan, appreciate the donation. Wow, thank you. And so, I mean, really, top to bottom, that's what stood out for me. Biden's policy, if you break it all down, Biden's policy is expanding the reach of the federal government to basically every corner of society, increasing the power of government, massive trillions and trillions and trillions of spending across the board, policy after policy. Policies that would make it harder for businesses, private businesses, policies that would vastly increase taxes, and really, for example, even eliminating single-family homes. It says this: eliminate single-family homes. Really, they're not calling it this, but it's socialism. It's a pretty, and there's degrees of socialism. This is a pretty serious degree of socialism. I understand some people want that, but understand what you're getting yourself into with this. Oh, wow, Richard Buchanan again. Thank you. Now, Trump's policy is more trying to, for example, fix the price of medicine, reduce the price of medicine, make healthcare plans more affordable, going through the processes and eliminating the government policies that are driving up prices. When it comes to schools, for example, making it so schools can't, it's not a federal loan system anymore. Maybe have that to an extent, but making it so the schools themselves have to give out the loans, possibly, meaning that they'll have to give loans students can pay back, meaning that they'll have a stake in whether students can pay off their loans or not, which means they would have to give them educations that actually work for employment, not like underwater basket weaving or, sexual diversity of squirrels or something like this, And so, fixing the problems at their heart, not going after the top level thing that will give extra money to systems that are really taking a lot of money right now. That's what really stood out to me the most, actually. All right, folks. Well, again, it's 11:35 and it's getting late. We'll end it here. Again, broadcasting Monday through Friday, 5 days a week. Also, this Saturday, we're going to do a special feature. We're going to be showing a film. So tune in Saturday, and I'll also be doing a live Q&A with the director of that film. It's China's Walking Dead. We actually had the director of it on the show previously, Kay Rubacek. And it's interviews with former Chinese Communist Party officials, giving an inside look at what actually happens within the Chinese Communist Party leadership. That they call themselves the Walking Dead. That's a name they use for themselves, and hence the name of the film and of the book they wrote. So I'll be doing a live Q&A Saturday night on that. So tune in for that. Also, next Saturday, we may be getting another film also focused on China. We'll have to keep you updated. It seems like it's finalized, not for sure, but we're trying to get it. And of course, elections are coming up. I'll be doing like a 6 or 7 hour live broadcast on election night. If y'all want to come hang out for 6 or 7 hours while we, watch the numbers come in, tune in for that. And then post-election, I'm going to be doing some on-the-ground reporting, going around a bit. I mentioned, for example, going to the drug smuggling tunnels in U.S.-Mexico border and doing some other doing some other on-the-ground work like that, looking at human trafficking, drug trafficking, and, more, say, lighter stories. I'm trying to get some, for example, I'm trying to get in with the Marine Corps, Camp Pendleton. We're talking with them right now, talking about military ethics and so on. So some good content coming up, some on-the-ground reporting coming up. Oh, wow, geez. Richard Buchanan, how will term limits become law? Really appreciate the donation. Last question then on that. Richard Buchanan, the Trump administration is going to make, at least in his policy, is going to make congressional term limits law. We'll have to see how that works. A lot of politicians are not going to be happy about that because that's their jobs. I think Trump would only be able to do that if he gets control of the House and Senate, if he gets a supermajority. But we'll have to see. All right, folks. Yeah, appreciate it. I'll get some rest. Can all tell I'm tired. It's been quite the journey the last couple of weeks. My work has increased quite a bit because of these debates and all the politics coming out right now. Who knows if this is going to change? If the coming elections is anything like the last one, it could be quite the ride again. But anyways, folks, that said, please take care of yourselves, stay healthy as always, and stay free. Thank you.